Hello and welcome back or to the channel. If you're new here, please click on the subscribe button, click on the like button, and drop a comment below whether you think I'm doing good, bad, ugly, whatever you think. Drop it in the comments below. This one's about 19.5 inches tall. You can make this as tall or short as you want. I've made this based off the furniture we have around the house, so it fit well on the couch. I basically custom built it for me. I use 2x4s and a 2x6 to make the top. You could use 2x6s, you could use 2x8s and do separate pieces. Depending on the look you want with your wood, you decide how you make your top, but again, I'm gonna show you how I did this with 2x4s and 2x6s. The same with your joining. So on your 2x4s, if you're using rough 2x4s, they're pretty bowy. If you're using the the high quality or premium 2x4s, they're a lot straighter, but there's still some bows and crooks and crevices. So if you're gonna joint these, remember that also. So if you're going to cut these 3 inches wide, you may want to cut them 3 1/8 inch, and that way you can plane off 1/8 of an inch to end up with your 24 when you go across here. So again, on your legs and everything, I've got nice straight edges here. You can leave the rolled over look, or you could take your sander, you can do whatever you want to with them. But I'm going to show you how to get the nice clean straight look. If you're going to go with just straight 2x4s, that saves you a lot of time because you don't have to rip all these down. But what it also does is it expands the width of your project. So just take into consideration your math when you're setting up your project. Now on my top pieces, they're 15 inches long. I've actually got this marked at 15 1/8 inch. What this will do when I glue these together, if I get off a hair on either end, which again, I'm not a carpenter, so I get off every now and then, I leave it a little bit long so I can go back and just nip the edge off of it and make them nice and smooth at the end. If you're good at what you're doing, you might not have to do that. If you're worse than me, you might have to do this 5 1/4 inches. It's always easier to nip off a little bit than to try to add. So something else I've done, I've taken a small clamp, just a piece of scrap wood here. I've actually made a fence stop here. So basically, I clamped this to the back of my top fence, slid my fence over. So every time I slide these in, I can go faster. Since I'm cutting a bunch of 15-inch boards, I can just keep on sliding them in. Slide them in, stop, and cut. And again, I'm not going to make you watch me cut boards. So with this being done, all my cuts are made. So here's what you need to decide whether you want to take off this extra edge, the little round over part, and make these nice and square. And if you want to square these up to like I'm going to do 3 inches, 3 inches, or if you want to leave the 3 1/2 inch, again, just redo your math, figure out how wide you want it, and then subtract your sides to make it 24 inches wide or however you want it. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and process my 2x4s. I'm not going to do the top or the bottom yet. We'll do that separately. I'm going to do these first. I'm going to rip these edges off first, then I'm going to cut them down to 3 inches. I'm going to rip the edge off of one of these and then cut it down to 1.5 inches, and same with the crosses. I'm going to rip the edge off, cut it into 2 1.5 inch sections. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that. If you've got 2x4s and they're not perfectly straight on the side, depending on how straight you want this project, when you run this through your fence, when you're putting pressure on here, if your fence is locked, your board will stay the same curve. So if there's a lower in here, when you push it through your fence, your board's going to wave, and you're going to have a wave on this side. If you want a perfectly straight board, if you take a steel beam level, like this one, not in the groove, put your 2x4 beside it. When you slide it with the level, and that'll ensure you've got a nice straight edge on this side. That way when you flip it over, you get perfect boards. Again, this is farmhouse furniture. You don't need to be that precise, but if you wanted to be, that's how you would get a nice straighter edge on it. So what I'm gonna do with this board is I basically just want to take this rounded over edge on it. So I'm gonna take it, I'm gonna open my fence, I'm gonna push my fence to where I just touched the blade, slide my board out, and I'm gonna tap it in a little bit further. You don't want to go too far because you want it 3 inches out of this board. It's 3 1/2 inches wide now. Your blade's gonna take about 1/4 inch out, plus your round over. So if you do this on one side, should leave you enough off the other side to get you a 3 inch board. All right, so with ears on, eyes on, we're gonna go ahead and cut the board. So as you can see, that gives me a nice crisp edge over here, and I've got more than enough room to get my 3 inches out of that. I'm not going to cut my 3 inches yet because I want to cut them all at the same time so I know they're all exactly the same. So I'm going to go ahead and rip down the rest of these 2x4s I've got, just taking this little edge off of each one of them. right, so I still haven't touched my top or my bottom. I've got my legs, my side, my front and back, and my crosses all up and flat edged. So I'm going to take these now, I'm going to set this all to 3 inches. I'm going to cut these down to 3, these to 3, 2 of these to 3, and these last 3 boards are going to get cut to 1.5 inches each. We'll take it, slide the tape measure to the fence. As you can see, I'm right to 3 inches on the outside edge of the tooth there. Another good thing about doing this is these pieces you get off the end boards. If you look at your box stores, Walmart, places like that, Home Depot, Lowe's, if you look, these are all pretty good sized boards. You can actually make those little baskets out of your scrap wood. Those baskets sell anywhere from like 14 to 20 bucks a piece. So the next thing I want to do is I want to bump this into 1.5 inches. I'm going to double check the top of my board. Some of these are sometimes off a little bit. This one's right at 1.5 inches. I'm going to go ahead and set my blade to 1.5 inches. Same way, outside edge of the tooth. 1.5. Again, this doesn't have to be perfect. Make it as perfect as you want, but that's pretty close to me. This is my front and back at the bottom, and these are my crosses. If for some reason you get your 1.5 inches off on one side and you're a little bit thicker, you could actually just flip it sideways and rip one more side off of it and make these perfectly square. I've got mine pretty close, but if you do mess up your cut, again, once you cut these down this side, flip them over on one side or the other and feed them back through again, and you'll shave them off to where they're even. All right, so the next step is to prep my top. I'm going to do it the same way I did all the legs and stuff. I'm basically going to rip the fine edge off of here. I'm going to cut these top 2 bigger pieces, my 2x6s, down to 4.5 inches. And then I'm going to cut my 2x4s down to 3 inches. All right, so if I did my math correctly, my 2x6s are 24 inches long. I'm going to cut them down to 4.5, so that gives me 9 inches. 24 minus 9 is 15. So I cut my 2x4s to 15 inches. Now, since I'm jointing these tabletops, instead of putting this on my joiner, I'm going to put my level up here. Again, this is an I-beam, metal I-beam, nice and flat. And I'm going to run this through with this on here. I'm going to push the level through at the same time I'm pushing the board through. It's kind of hard to see here, but as you can see, by doing that, I get a pretty good joint here. All right, so now that everything is cut except for the bottom shelf, what you need to do is decide your finish, whether you're going to paint this. Do you want a smooth finish? Do you want to antique it? Do you want to stain it? We're still going to drill pocket holes in the legs and the sides and places like that. So I wouldn't sand it quite yet. When we get the pocket holes done, then sand everything. Then if you're going to paint it, you want a nice finish paint, I would go ahead and paint it before you assemble it also. Again, this is up to you. You can do it whatever way you want. It's just easier to sand and paint while it's all in pieces like this than once you get it all together. All right, I've mocked my 2 sides up here. So this is the side top. I've got this board laying flat, so it'll face outward. This board's turned up on the side, so that makes the bottom support for the bottom of the table. I've done that with both of the sides. And again, this is one of those situations where your side and your leg are almost the same length, so make sure you don't get them mixed up. So what I want to do is I want to measure up about 2 inches on the inside here. So I'm going to do 2 inches here, 2 inches there, and I'm going to go ahead and mark the front too, because we've also got the front boards that are going to attach to here. Now you can make this 2 inches, you can make it 4 inches, you can make it 1 inch, you can flatten it to the floor. This is all your preference, whatever you like. I'm going to give it 2 inches off the floor. So the next thing I want to do is I want to look at my board, and do I want this exposed? Or do I don't want this exposed? Now if you're going to paint it, it probably doesn't matter unless you've got a bunch of dents or dimples in there. In my case, I'm painting, so I'm going to take my smoother side, I'm going to turn it the way I want it. And I'm going to check all my boards the same way. Anything that's going to be exposed, like this is going to be my face, check it. This is my leg facing outward. I've got like a crack there. So I'm going to turn it this way so you can't see the crack. So I'm examining all the boards, doing the same thing for it. Best sides go out. If it's me, probably every single board I had was turned the wrong way. That one that way. That one there. So all my good sides are out. So what I'll do now is take my pencil. I'm going to just mark on here where my pocket holes go. That way I know which side of the board, sorry I'm trying to hold the camera and pencil at the same time, which side of the board my pockets go on. And repeat. That way I don't screw up when I get over to the pocket hole maker and screw the wrong sides. Alright, so my pocket holes are drilled. I've marked 2 inches up on the side, 2 inches up on the inside. I've got my 90 here. I'm going to use it to straighten up my edge up here. I'll pull these out. I'm going to glue both ends, drop them in, clamp them. Once I get them clamped, I'm going to stand it up, take a look at it, make sure everything's flush, tighten the clamps up, and then we'll put the screws in. Now remember, when you're putting this in, this one goes flat to your table. Now, my table is not the best table in the world, as you can tell. It's a work table. It's also plastic, so it doesn't, it's got a bow in it. It's not perfectly straight. So that's why when I stand this up, I'm going to make sure it's perfectly even before I clamp it down and screw it. If you're using a nice hard workbench or something here, probably don't have to do what I'm doing. It'll probably be nice and even. So I got my glue there, and again, I'm just going to get this visually close for now. Check my top the best I can. Check this side, and I'm going to clamp it. I'm not going to over tighten this. And make sure you put the clamp where you can actually get to your screw holes too. I'm just going to bump it up to where it touches. Double check. That's good. And glue my top. If you cut these nice and square, that should pretty much go right into place where it wants to be. Again, not going to over tighten these, they're just snug right now. I'm going to stand it up without losing my clamp. If the board's twisted or turned, you can actually be square on the bottom and not on the top, and vice versa. Now, again, you can make this as perfect or as imperfect as you want. That's pretty darn close. I think I got a little warp in my board, so I'm not quite perfect here, but what I'll probably do is I'm going to clamp it, put this screw in up here, and then I'll push up a little bit here and tighten the bottom screw down. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and tighten my clamps up. Don't want anything to move. I'm going to use 2.5 inch pocket screws in this. All right, so I went ahead and hit this with a 120 just to smooth down some of the swirls from the saw. A couple little blemishes here and there that I didn't really like. I'm going to go ahead and distress this anyhow, so I'm not too worried about the perfect finish. But for me personally, I just wanted to smooth it out a little bit. Again, finish this however you want. You don't even have to do what I'm doing here. Again, this could just be a rough 2x4. You could already have it painted and done by now. I'm just going through a few extra steps for the finish that I'm going for. This next thing I want to do is I want to take my fronts, put them in here. I'll do the same thing I did on the sides. I'm going to clamp them, straighten them out, glue them in place, and then screw them down. So I've got my tops glued in, my fronts, my bottom. Now this is the 1.5 inch thick beam here. Goes in the bottom. As you can see, I've lined them up perfectly here. If you stand this upright, it's easier to do than me leaning over the edge. But I took my square and I laid it across my edge just to make sure I was nice and square across the edges. Squared up my corners before I screwed them down, so my corners are nice and square. Nice and tight, should be good. So I'm going to clamp this, screw this piece in, do the same on the bottom. We'll go to the next step. So I'm on the side of my unit. I want to do my crosses next. So basically what I want is I want this piece to fit up in the groove at an angle and down at the bottom at an angle. Now, I'm sure there's some funky math formula. You could take this by this by this and divide it by this and multiply it by pi and get the correct angle at the top. I don't know that math formula and don't care that I don't know that I want to know it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the corner, if I can get the camera off here. I'm going to take this corner and clamp it so that corner is just overlapping that at almost a perfect angle. Then I'm going to take this bottom half and I'm going to clamp it so this corner is touching that corner at almost a perfect angle. Once I get that done, I'm going to take a pencil marker from the inside and then I'll have my angle to cut. So I've got this one, so it's right on the corner. And I've got this one, so it's right on the corner. Now from the inside, with those clamped into place, what I want to do is I'm going to take my pencil and mark that angle. A little easier to do if you don't have a camera in your hand. Sorry, I got the camera all off of whack, but basically I marked that angle also. I don't want to do my other side yet. Basically I want to do this first, take it off. All right, so now that you got your pencil marks on here, what you can do, you can either go over your skill saw and start chopping, hope you get it right. Your chop saw, skill saw, clay, same thing. Or you can take this little Kreg tool I got here. It's a little corner measurer. I'm going to cross it inside. I'm going to lay the flat edge on this. I'm going to slide it down to where my line is. All I have to do is take this until I find the perfect line. Once I get the line, which is there, tighten my little thumb screw down. On the wheel here, it shows my inside and outside. So it's 140 and 38. So 38 degrees is what I want to cut. So I'm going to set my saw to 38 degrees. Chop this, chop that, should fit perfectly in place. Alright, so after snipping it up a few times, I've got my fit that I want. I'm going to take this one back out. I'm going to lay it on top of my other one. Make sure it's straight, pencil mark my lines, take them over, cut them, bring them back over. So what I was saying before, if you didn't catch that, if you've never done this before, basically by leaving this a little bit longer, I'm just going to keep on snaking off a little bit of this at a time until I get a good fit. So I'm basically going to take off less than the width of the saw blade. It may take me 3 or 4 times before I get this to fit in here where I want it. So I think I got that where I wanted at. Basically, I'd rather make more trips back and forth to the saw to get a nice good fit than to make less trips back and forth to the saw and have a sloppy fit. So now you can do 2 things here. You can either lap this, which means you can cut half of this board out, half of this board out, stick them together, or you can just cut it and put it in place. Similar technique to marking this either way. I'm going to pull this so it's halfway past this, halfway past the bottom, give or take a little bit. I'm going to put this one on the inside, same thing, halfway and halfway. Again, if you did that right, it should be a snug fit, if not a perfect fit. So I'm going to bump those together. I want to bump these together. If I don't bump it out, that gives me my crossing point. So what I want to do is mark these, because I'm going to cut this and I'm going to attach it to this. I'm going to cut this one and attach it to this. I'm not going to lap mine. I'll mark it on both sides. I'm going to remove it. We'll make this upper right, lower left. When I cut this, if this angle changes any at all, or if this angle's off just a hair down here, it could affect where my marking is. So I'm going to make sure I keep this in the same position it's in right now. So I'm going to go cut this. Again, I'm going to cut it longer than it needs to be, and then just snake this up to where it needs to be. So I'm putting my marker on there, lining my line up, tighten it down. That shows me I've got like a 78-degree angle. Now back over to my saw. This time I've taken off my 45-degree jig. I'm back to a 90-degree. So I've got 78 degrees on my angle. I'm starting with a 90. So 90 minus 78 is 12. So I've got my saw set to 12 degrees. And again, you'll see when I pull this down, straight across the line. So I'm going to snug this up, stick them back in. So upper right side, just so you know there's no pauses here. I'm going to push this into place now where it's supposed to be. Upper right. If you did that right, you should have a nice form fit right there. If it's off a little bit, like it is, you may need to take a little bit more off of this. So I'm going to just snip a little bit more off this. Go ahead and cut my bottom one, put it in place, and I should be ready to go on the next side. I moved the camera down. Hopefully you can see this on here. You can see my top one fits in there pretty good. It's good enough for what I'm doing here. By the time I line that one up, push it in place, it lines up good. My bottom, I got a gap here and a gap here. So that doesn't mean I need to take off this edge. If I flush this piece back out where it's supposed to be, you'll notice it's still straight. I just need to take off a little bit more here. So make sure you're not changing your angle. Don't doubt your angle. Just cut it down a little bit more. And again, that's not much. That's like probably half a blade, if even half a blade. So I'm going to turn around and repeat the same thing on the other side. All right, so there's several ways of attaching this. It's just for decoration, so the glue will hold it in place once the glue sets. So you don't really need a lot of pressure to hold it in place. I'm going to take mine, and you can brad nail through here, so you can shoot a brad in here, a brad in here. The middle one, you can shoot the brad through here to hold this one in place. And the top one, you can put a screw in from the back and hold it in place and glue it. What I'm going to do with these, on the inside of the top here, I already did this side so you can see what I was doing. I'm going to take a screw. I'm going to pre-drill a hole down at an angle, not a steep angle. Once I start to screw it, then I'm going to take the drill, turn it upward, and run it down into this one. Just make sure your screw is not so long that it pops out of the bottom. So make sure you get the right length screw. So that's how I'm going to secure the top. The bottom is deep enough that I'm just going to take the screw, put a pocket hole in there, recess it in there, and shoot it up through the bottom. That'll keep that one in place. So we're going to attach this bar first. Clamp it to where your clamp is not going to be in the way of your screw, but your board doesn't move out of the way. So I'm going to be right on the edge of the board. I'm just trying to keep the board from pushing forward and backwards when I screw this down. Once I get that in place, it's going to be difficult with the camera in the way. I'm going to give it my best shot. I'll take a drill. And again, I'm not drilling down yet. Starting to drill straight in. I'll change the angle of the drill. Since I don't have a super long bit, I'm just going to start the hole. I don't want to split my wood. I'm going to grab a 2-inch screw. I'm going to run it down in at an angle. Now this part's going to be up under the tabletop. You won't see it, so it doesn't have to be pretty. I'll take the screw and I'm going to force it towards the fat part of the wood and downward. So sometimes you got to back it up a couple times to get the angle you want. I'll take my hand and put it under here and put a little pressure up. Now again, you can clamp it if you're not sure your screw's too long. Make sure it didn't come through the other side. I'm good to go. Top is done. I'm going to take the bottom of it. Take my clamp off here. Put the table upright. Same thing, I'm going to put the clamp on here to keep it from moving. Again, I'm just covering the crack there so it doesn't push in or out. You don't have to do this step if you don't want to. Make sure when you run your screw through for your pot, for your recess, don't hit your screw underneath. So I'm going to go up a little bit higher than what it is. But I'm going to drill down in it at a slight angle. You don't necessarily have to countersink it, but I'm doing it. Same thing, I'll take a 2-inch screw and shoot it up in there. Clamp off, that beam's in place. Back upright. Now maybe it just happens to me. I can't imagine it's just me. I'm sure everybody that does woodworking runs into this. Some people just edit it out. Some people leave it in. As you can see, screwing all this together, my cross has got off a little bit here. So I got two options. I can just kind of fudge it to where it's kind of in between both of them. I can slide this over to right about there. I can get a pretty good cover there. It'll look fine. Put the screw in down here and be good and have a little gap on this side. No one besides you will probably ever notice that. If you're selling this to somebody, again, distressed furniture, doesn't have to be perfect. But if I put it up in place where it belongs, as you can see, my cross is way off. What happened, as you can tell when I put it back in place, something has moved up here, down here. Might even got it on the wrong side versus the other one. That side fit really good. So I can either cut this board a little bit longer, make it fit properly, or just slide it over, kind of shim it in. Me, I'm just going to glue it, slide it over, shim it in place like that, paint it, no one will ever notice. All right, so with that in place, that's our base complete. Now again, finish this as good as you want. You can sand it back down. You can use wood filler, fill all the little grooves, cracks, crevices. You can take a hammer, beat the crap out of it, distress the whole bottom of it. Up to you, but that at least gets your foundation done. All right, time to work on the top. We got some decisions to make here. First of all, I left these a little bit longer, as you remember at the very beginning. So when I flush this side out, if I've got a crack or a groove over here when I clamp all this together, glue it, pocket screw it, I'm gonna take my saw and just run a nice straight edge across there so when I butt this side out, it fits in perfectly. Then you got to decide what kind of finish you're going to do. Are you going to do a distress finish? Are you going to take hammer, nails, beat the crap out of it, get a nice wood distress look and stain it? If so, you can probably just clamp together like it is, sand it a little bit, beat the crap out of it, and stain it. Me, I'm going to run mine through a planer so I got a nice flat, smooth finish on the top. I'm not going to stress it. I'm just going to stain it. And I'm just going to paint the stress the bottom of when I do the paint. Either way, before you do that, make sure you pick your boards. Flip your boards all over, look at the tops, look at the bottoms, see which one looks the best. Put your bad side, whichever way you want. I prefer to put my bad side up, my good side down, just so when I go to screw this together, I'm going to mark my lines across here, and I don't want to put the screws on the wrong side of my wood. So if you're ready for that step, again, just mark these, glue all your boards together, clamp it, screw them together, and move on to the next step. Me, I gotta go plane some wood. Alright, so there's everything ran through the planer. Again, I'm not going for perfection here. I just didn't want all the waves and stuff because I'm not going to distress the top. Alright, so I'm ready to put my top together. Again, you can do this a couple different ways, and you can do it several different ways. You can either just glue these boards together, put them in a clamp, let them set overnight. It should be perfectly fine. If you want to do it faster, you can set screw them, or you can countersink the screws, put them all together. You can glue and countersink the screws all together. And again, depending on the finish you're going for, you could run these for plain or even more. I'm gonna basically glue and set screw or countersink screws. Again, I'm not too worried about this edge right now because I cut these a little bit longer. So even though I don't have a perfect seam with my breadboard or my sideboard here, I'm not worried about it. What I want is a nice clean finish across here. So I'm gonna clamp and screw these together one section at a time. Make sure when you clamp these together, you'll see, use an inboard clamp, or I'm just gonna use a regular clamp to keep these together. And that'll also keep you from creating a warp or a bow. If you pull these together with just a wood clamp, if you only clamp them on the top, you tend to bow you concave it. If you only clamp it on the bottom, you convex it. So basically, if you're gonna clamp this all the way across, make sure you put clamps on the bottom and on the top, so you create an even flat board and you don't create a curved up board. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pencil and straight edge where I want my pocket holes. So two in, and then probably 7.5, which is my middle. And then I'm going to split the difference between these two again. And these don't have to be super precise. I mean, you can do them again as accurate as you want. I'm going to depend more on the glue holding this together than the screws, but 5 screws in each one of these boards holding it together, it's not going to go anywhere. The other thing to remember when you pick your screw size, if you plane these like I did, normally you would use a 2.5 inch screw on a 2x4, but since I planed them, if you use a 2.5 inch screw, you're liable to pop right through the top of your table. So make sure you, again, check the screw before you actually run the screws in. All right, so all my pocket holes are drilled. Now, if you do like I did and you cut these down to 3 inches, when you do your pocket holes, you may come out the edge of your board. Now, I don't want this to be on the end of my table, so I want to make sure I use a plain board for the end of my table with a nice smooth surface, like so. Same on the other end. That's why I had to do a double pocket. So basically, one will drone this way, one will drone this way. That way, when I end up on my other side, I end up with a nice smooth board on that side. I'm going to take a couple 2x4s here, and I'm basically going to create a little platform to set these on. It's going to be hard to do it on the camera, but this will give me room for my glue to drip underneath of it, and it'll also give me room to clamp on the outside. Plus, again, my table is not the most stable table. It's not the straightest, so if I do a couple 2x4s, I'm going to get a better surface, and I'm going to end up with a nice smoother plane than I would if I did it on the curve of my plastic table. So I got those where I want them at. I'm going to start pulling and clamping and screwing them together. Fold it back down, put it in place. Once I get it in place, I'm going to take my 90 again, double check, take my clamps. I just got a couple small clamps. Now again, I'm not using these to put any pressure on it. This is just to keep the board from tilting left and right on me. Make sure my seam stays straight. So those don't even have to be super tight. I've still got a gap there. I'm going to take me a full clamp, which I don't have ready. We're going to clamp across the board, making sure that I don't clamp my over top of my screw holes. I'm going to take a full clamp, put it on, making sure I don't clamp over my screw holes. Snug it. On the other side. Snug it again. Watching my screw holes, I'm not covering so I can hit them when I run the screws in. Tighten these up so they're nice and even. Then I'm going to finish clamping this down. Run my screws in, then work my way to the outside edges. Start there and then work your way out. Repeat that down throughout the board. Alright, so after I got everything clamped, I just flipped it over. Alright, so after I got everything screwed together, I just flipped it over, checked it, made sure it was straight, which it is. Wiped off the excess glue. Don't care too much about the bottom. Got all the glue off the top that I could. Now again, back to your finish. This still has some seams. You can see the grooves. You can leave this just like it is, stain it, paint it, whatever, and be done with it. I'm going to take some sanding. I'm going to sand this down to get it a lot smoother and get rid of some of my seams. Plus I'm going to stain it, so I need to make sure I get all the glue off here. So make sure you clean your glue off good. Stain does not stick to glue. All right, so the next step, I've got to get me a nice straight edge down this side here, and I need a nice straight edge down that side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a square, put the square on here, take a piece of track, saw track, butt it up against here so I've got a nice 90-degree line. As I slide this toward the end, my shortest board is at the very end here. I can see a nice straight line going across here. It keeps getting bigger and bigger. So what I want to do is take this board here, I'm going to measure 1.5 inches back in and clamp my fence guide. When I do that, when I run my skill saw down through here, it'll just take off the very end of the board. Your skill saw might be a little different. I'm using a DeWalt 20 volt cordless. I've got 1.5 inches offset from my blade to the fence on it. You'll see in just a second once I get this clamped on. All right, so again, I'm gonna take this, put it to 1.5 inches. I'm gonna get this just eyeballed in place. So my tape measure's at 1.5 inches right now, once I get it there. So I'm at 1.5 inches. You can do a little bit if you want to. Again, you're just gonna lose a little table width. This goes back to the beginning when I said to leave room in case you need to do this. I'm gonna clamp that loosely in place. So I'm at 1.5 inches still. So I'm gonna clamp it from this side. All right, so I've measured in 1.5 inches. This is my shortest board. I've clamped this on this side. I'm gonna take my square, make sure it's butted up nice and straight. I'm gonna push this to where my guide runs straight across my board. And once I get that there, I'm gonna clamp this end on the inside, like so. Double check, triple check. Slide that back. Pop this clamp without moving the board, clamp it to the inside. So with that side being done, now all we do is spin around to the other side. The other side's not nearly as bad, but I still want to. All right, with 2 smooth sides, now I'm gonna take it over, I'm gonna sand it. I'm gonna hit it with a 120. I'm not gonna sand it all the way because we still gotta put our ends on or our breadboards on. So I'm gonna go ahead and sand it to where it's close, and then we'll attach the breadboards and do the same thing. We'll rip off the extra little piece that's on the end here since we're over like 1/8 of an inch. But I want to attach the breadboards first. That way, if the breadboards are over, I can cut through the breadboards and everything and have a nice straight edge on both sides. So I'm gonna use this end as my top. So I'm gonna put a little T on here, and then I'm gonna just mark my pocket holes. I know where I want them at, so I might as well do the other boards too. I've done every other board, so I may as well do each one. Now I don't need 2 in each one of these boards since I've got them all clamped and glued together. It's like one big slab. And if you did a 2x6 here or a 2x8, you would put like 2 in each board. That way you got good stability. Go drill my holes. Same thing I did on this. I'm going to clamp it, glue it, and screw it together. No sense in you watching me do that. All right, so with my top finished now, finish this to whatever level you want. If you want to fill any holes, fill them. If you're going to stain it, make sure you get all your glue off. I sanded this with a 220. I'm not going to go any, I don't think it needs any more than that for what I'm doing with it. It's softwood, so some pieces come out more than others. So when you're sanding, make sure when you're pushing down, you push down evenly across here. If not, you'll end up with divots and grooves all over the place, even using an orbital sander. All right, so one of our last things to make is our bottom shelf. So one of the last things we need to do is cut our bottom shelf in. I waited till the end to make sure if everything, once you start screwing and twisting and turning, sometimes things move a little bit. So I get my final measurements now. So I'm 14 on the money by 17. So we're going to paint this, and while this is drying, we're going to do a 14 by 17 shelf for the bottom. All right, so I've cut my boards to 14 inches lengthwise. Widthwise, I want to end up with 3 boards in here. It's 17 inches deep. So what I want to do is I want to take 17, divide it by 3. That gives me 5.666. 5.666 is a little bit less than 11/16 if you do the fractions out. So hitting 11/16 on here is going to be a little bit complicated unless you've got, you know, a precise table saw or something like that. I'm using a job site table saw. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this easier. I'm going to take this just a little bit less than 5 3/4, rip them widthwise down, measure it, and then cut off a 17. That's just faster and simpler than trying to figure out 5.666 fraction and measuring it out for me. All right, so with them cut down to 5 3/4 inches, that gives me an overall of about 17.5. I shaved off just a little bit, but so if I end up with that, now I can basically take this, I'm gonna go ahead and joint this together, make sure I'm flush on my end so I got a nice square on the inside, and then I can rip off to 17 inches exactly. Now, if you're unsure about your cuts, again, it's a whole lot easier to take board off than to add board. So if you're not sure about your 14 width, leave it 14 1/4, and just keep running it through your table saw, taking little pieces off at a time until it fits in there nice and snug. All right, so after I got my shelf cut pretty much where I wanted it, again, it was a little bit over what I needed. I trimmed off the edges. I got 17 by 14, so I fit right through the hole now, nice and snug on both sides. So we're going to measure the thickness of this. We're going to put a cleat on here so the shelf sits on top of the cleat. If you want to do pocket screws, you can easily flip this over, put pocket screw holes in here, and just pocket screw it to the frame. I like to sit it on cleats myself. I'm going to take my scrap wood here that I've got left over from the shelves, and I'm going to cut me a couple cleats. So this is the one I cut off the bottom. This doesn't have to be super thick. I'm not putting a lot of weight on it, so I'm just going to split this in half, split this in half. And again, it's the same thickness as the 3/4 inches. The 2x4 at the bottom is 1.5 inches, so when I do this, put the shelf on it, I'll have the proper height for my shelving. All right, so with these cut, again, these are just going to fit on the bottom, like so. The shelf will right on top of it. I'm going to take these now, and I'm going to cut them just a little bit smaller than what I actually need. I don't need them to go from edge to edge. You can do edge to edge from you want, but I'm just going to make it so it's maybe a 1/2 inch shorter than what the board actually is. Now that I'm ready to stain the top and the bottom, I just realized that I didn't drill pocket holes in my front and back and sides for my tabletop to screw to. Now there's a couple different ways of doing this. You could put an L bracket in here, which some people do. You can make little clips that you can sink into the wood, hold the top up. I'm just going to pocket screw it, so I'm going to take my Craig over there, just flip it upside down. I'll flip the whole thing upside down and just drill 4 pocket holes, or 2 pocket holes on each corner. And just in case you did the same thing I did, if you're following my instructions, you probably did. If you remembered, I'm going to put this further in the video. I'm going to kind of clip it in, edit it in somehow, or make a note on there. But basically I just flipped my unit over, balanced it with a piece of 2x4, and put the Craig on it. Luckily I didn't have my paint done yet, so this is the first coat of black. So I'm going to drill my pocket holes, and I'll just respray it again if I need to. All right, so for my finish, I'm going to use a pre-stain. I'm going to use a Early American 230, and I'm going to use a polyurethane for the top of it. You can use a polyacrylic if you want to, or acrylic, or whatever top you want. I'm doing this inside my garage, so the polyurethane seems to be the most compatible for my situation. If you got a better ventilated space, you do the polyacrylic or something else. All right, so while my stains are drying, I'm going to put my cleats on. You can do this before or after you paint. We're not painting inside of here anyhow because this is going to get the shelving in it. But what I want to do is I want to pre-drill these. So again, I've cut these a little bit shorter than what I need. That way they fit in the pocket. Make sure you get the correct side. So take a piece of your shelving unit or your shelf. All right, so I'm going to show you how I'm going to attach these cleats. Now, if this was 1.5 inch stock and I didn't cut it down, I would just go ahead and measure up 3/4 inch, mount it. But just to make sure, it's easier to just take a small piece of your bottom shelf, take your cleat that's already pre-drilled, and lay this on top and get a nice flush edge on it. So I've already done these two over here. So I'm gonna put it on there, take my clamp and slide it underneath. Make sure you don't cover your screw hole. And I'm just gonna snug this up to where it doesn't move on me. Make sure your piece is down so you can put your shelf on it in the front. So this is not tight, I can still move it up and down if I need to. Take my piece of shelving, slide it in, and just flush it out. Check, double check once you get it where you want it. You have to push it back up, reach underneath there, push your cleat back up. Once you get it there, tighten your clamps up, pull it out, and then screw your shelf or screw your cleat in. I'm just using 1¼ inch screws on these. If you use a thicker piece of wood, like a thicker cleat, you might use 1.5 inches. Again, just determine whatever size you want. I prefer to do my center first. If you see something physically move, put your shelf back up in there and readjust if you have to. If you do the outside edge first and it moves, then you can't really adjust anything. So do your center first and then it'll still pivot back and forth. And then just do that on all 4 sides. So I'm ready to paint my base and poly my tops. So I'm going to poly the tops first because it takes about 2 hours between coats on the poly. I'll probably just put 2 coats on there. So I'll put the 1 coat on there. I'll paint my base. I'll clean up my mess that's around here. Make sure you don't want to do any sanding. If you're doing this inside your garage, make sure the air is all cleared out overnight or something between sanding and putting your poly on. If not, you have a bunch of stuff stuck into your poly. Once the paint's done, the floor is clean, everything's picked up in here a little bit, I'll come back, put my 2nd coat of poly on, and then I'll be probably done for the day until the poly dries, and then tomorrow we'll attach the base. All right, so I rechecked my bottom piece. Once you paint this, if you get a little paint down in your grooves, you may create a little bit of a problem here. So I basically just sanded a couple edges on here just to make it fit in there nice and perfect. So I've got it ready to drop in. My top is completely dry now, so I'm ready to attach it. Before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and distress my piece. I'm just going to take some sandpaper or my orbital sander. I'm just going to hit it places to bring the black through it. Again, this is optional. If you don't want to do that, don't have to do that. Entirely up to you. All right, so that's what I ended up with. Again, this took like 5 minutes. Distress it as little or as much as you want to. I just got it evenly look. Like I said, I don't want it to look like it's beat to death, but I don't want it to look like it's brand new either. Now once I get that done, like I said, I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to drill some holes in my cleat. I'm not going to drill a lot. I'm going to do probably 2, 2, 2, and 2. So 8 screws in the bottom just to screw up through to hold the bottom piece in. I've got a really snug fit on my bottom piece. Again, this is one step you don't have to do. Or you could take your bottom and you could pocket hole like you did there and just screw it into the sides. Again, I prefer the cleats. Now I did countersink these bottom screw holes. Not that anyone's going to be looking up under your table, but if for some reason you catch it from a far angle, you got a really wide room, you don't want to see a little screw head sticking down. So I did countersink these a little bit. I'll drop my bottom in, screw it down, and then we'll be ready to attach our top. So I've got it flipped over. I drilled my holes in for my bottom shelf. Now, to make it easier on yourself, if you put your top on next, it'll be a whole lot easier to get to these screws. If not, you're going to have to reach through these holes and try to angle your drill and stuff to get in there. So I'm going to attach my top first, drop my bottom shelf in, then attach my bottom shelf. I'm going to take my stand, just going to kind of eyeball it. Make sure your opening goes whichever direction you want. So this is my side beams. I want my breadboards running down the edge with my side beams. If you want to do it the other way, you want the breadboard in front, flip it around that way. This is how I want mine set. So I'm going to put it on here and I'm just going to do some measurements and get this lined up as square as I possibly can. So after I got it evened out here, I took a couple clamps just to hold it in place while I screw it down. That way it doesn't move on me. Yeah. All right, so you see my top is on now. I'm gonna take my bottom, slide it in. Again, now my bottom fits in there nice and snug. So if your bottom fits nice and tight like that, you don't have to screw that from the bottom. If you want to attach it from the bottom, simply flip it over, shoot your screws up to the bottom and attach it. So another option for the bottom is to plank it and not screw this one like this one's screwed together. Nice solid piece of wood, but if you want to plank it and you end up with more of a plank look, you can go with this. I think I like this look better. This is the way I did my first one that I did. So I've got a matching set now if I do it this way. All I need to do is put my poly on there, let it dry. Same thing here, you can attach these from the bottom if you want. You don't have to. They're not going to fall over unless your table flips over. So depending on if you're moving your table or flipping your table over, those sit in there perfectly. Don't need to do anything. So there's the end result. Quite happy with the way it turned out. This is probably a 2-day project between the paint and the stain drying. The assembly took maybe 4 to 6 hours to cut everything and assemble it. And depending again on your finish, you could probably put this together in a couple hours if you didn't, cut the boards down, cut the smooth edges off. If you just left this 2x4 and you went out and bought some 2x2s, you could probably put this together in half the time it took me to put it together. Again, I just wanted more of this clean, sharp edge look. Something else you can do on the edges when you're sanding this or distressing it, you can actually take this and roll this if you wanted a little bit with a sander just to get the sharp edge off. Sharp corner same up on top here. You could roll this, you could round it over, however you want to finish your top. We don't have any small kids anymore in the house, so I'm not worried about someone banging a head or anything like that. But if you have problems like that, or if you have to do something, you could round the edges. Again, you could round them over. However you want to finish your top, up to you. So I want to thank everyone for watching. This is the first time I've ever really videotaped building anything that I assembled like this. So hopefully I get better as I go. I apologize for any of the repeated words over and over and over. I'm going to try to edit down the best I possibly can. Please click on like, subscribe, drop me a comment.